Stray dog jumped on woman's car and begged to save her puppies. What happens next is shocking. Dr. Mirachin hadn't planned on being a hero that night. After 16 hours of back-to-back surgeries at the Hope Valley Veterinary Clinic, all she wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The storm that had been threatening all day had finally broken, turning the world outside into sheets of silver rain illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. "Get home safe, Dr. Chin," called Nancy, the night receptionist, as Mira gathered her things. "Roads are getting nasty out there." Mira managed a tired smile. "Thanks, Nancy. Don't forget to lock up behind me." The parking lot was nearly empty, just her blue Honda Civic and Nancy's old pickup truck remaining. Mira made a dash for her car, her worn leather medical bag clutched to her chest, but was already soaked by the time she slid behind the wheel. She sat for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and watching rivulets of water race down her windshield. The day's cases played through her mind as she pulled out onto the main road: a German Shepherd with a twisted stomach, 3 routine spays, and a particularly tricky surgery on a cat who'd swallowed a toy car. All successful, thank goodness, but exhausting. She'd gotten into veterinary medicine to help animals, but some days felt like an endless marathon. The usually busy streets of Hope Valley were nearly deserted, most people having sought shelter from the storm. Myra's windshield wipers worked overtime as she navigated through puddles that were growing deeper by the minute. She was about halfway home when it happened, the moment that would change everything. A dark shape burst from between 2 parked cars, launching itself directly at her vehicle. Myra's heart leaped into her throat as she slammed on the brakes, her car hydroplaning slightly before coming to a stop. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd hit whatever it was. Then she saw it clearly: a dog, medium-sized and lean, with matted brown fur plastered to its body by the rain. But instead of running away, the dog jumped onto her hood. "What the?" Mira started to say, but the words died in her throat. The dog wasn't acting aggressive or scared. It was looking directly at her through the windshield, pawing at the glass with an urgency that made Myra's professional instincts kick in. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She cracked her door open, ready to slam it shut if the dog showed any signs of aggression. Instead, the animal immediately jumped down and ran to her side, grabbing her sleeve with gentle but insistent teeth. "Hey there," Mira said softly, her trained eye automatically assessing the animal. Female, probably around 3 years old, no collar but well-muscled, not your typical stray. The dog's brown eyes were clear and intelligent, showing no signs of rabies or distress that might explain her bizarre behavior. "What's wrong, girl?" The dog released her sleeve and took a few steps away, then turned back to look at Mira with an expression that could only be described as pleading. She barked once, the sound almost lost in a crack of thunder, then took a few more steps and looked back again. Mira knew she should get back in her car. It was late, she was exhausted, and following strange dogs through the rain in the dark was definitely not in any safety manual. But something about this dog's behavior tugged at both her professional instincts and her heart. This wasn't random. The dog wanted something specific from her. "Okay," Mira said, reaching back into her car for her medical bag. If an animal needed help, she couldn't just drive away. "Lead the way." The dog took off immediately, but not so fast that Mira couldn't keep up. They left the main street, moving deeper into the industrial district where many of Hope Valley's old factories had stood abandoned since the economic downturn 10 years ago. The rain seemed to grow heavier with each block they covered, and Myra's scrubs were thoroughly soaked by the time they reached a chain-link fence surrounding what looked like a partially completed construction site. The dog squeezed through a gap in the fence, then waited expectantly. Mira hesitated. The site looked like it had been abandoned mid-project, with half-finished structures looming like concrete skeletons against the stormy sky. Heavy equipment stood silent and rusting, and piles of building materials were scattered about, slowly being reclaimed by weeds. "This is probably trespassing," Mira muttered to herself, but she was already looking for a way through the fence. She found a section where the links had been cut and pulled apart, creating a gap just big enough for a person to squeeze through. The edges were rusty but smooth. This wasn't a fresh cut. As soon as she made it through, she heard what the dog had been trying to tell her: puppies. Their cries were faint but unmistakable, carrying on the wind between rumbles of thunder. The mother dog, for surely that's what she was, led Mira deeper into the site, past towering stacks of steel beams and mountains of gravel. They approached what looked like the beginning of a foundation, where concrete walls rose about 4 feet from the ground before stopping abruptly. The dog headed straight for a section where part of the wall had collapsed, creating a dark opening that seemed to lead underground. The puppy's cries were clearer now, echoing up from somewhere in the darkness below. Mira pulled out her phone and switched on its flashlight, illuminating a rusty maintenance ladder that descended into what looked like some kind of old tunnel system. The air rising from the opening carried the musty smell of wet earth and corroding metal, along with something else, something chemical and out of place. The mother dog had already started down the ladder, her wet fur gleaming in Mira's flashlight beam. She paused halfway down and looked back up, those intelligent brown eyes seeming to ask, "Are you coming?" Mira knew she should call someone. The police, animal control, anyone. But what would she tell them? That she followed a strange dog to an abandoned construction site because it asked her to? That she could hear puppies crying underground? By the time she convinced someone to come out in this storm, it might be too late. Looking down into that dark hole, Mira made a decision that would haunt her for months to come. She shifted her medical bag to her shoulder, got a firm grip on the ladder, and began to climb down into the darkness. The metal rungs of the ladder felt ice-cold against Mira's palms as she descended into the darkness. Each step down echoed in the vast space below, mixing with the muffled sound of thunder from above. The mother dog had already disappeared into the blackness, leaving Mira to follow with nothing but her phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. 20 feet down, the air changed. The fresh scent of rain gave way to something older, musty concrete, stagnant water, and an underlying chemical smell that made her throat tighten. 30 feet down, her feet finally touched solid ground, the impact sending tiny ripples through puddles of collected rainwater. Mira swept her light across her surroundings, trying to orient herself. She stood in what appeared to be an old drainage system or perhaps a forgotten civil defense bunker from decades past. The tunnel stretched in both directions, its curved ceiling just high enough to stand comfortably. Water trickled down walls covered in a thick coating of moss and grime, creating an eerie symphony of drips that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Hello?" she called out softly, immediately regretting it as her voice echoed back at her, distorted and strange. The mother dog appeared at the edge of her light beam, whining urgently. The puppy's cries were clearer now, bouncing off the curved walls in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint their source. As Mira took her first steps into the tunnel, her medical training kicked in, categorizing details with clinical precision. The air was cool but not cold, suggesting some connection to the surface that allowed for ventilation. The floor was concrete, not dirt, indicating this was a planned structure, not a natural formation. But it was what she saw next that made her pause. In the beam of her flashlight, footprints stood out clearly in the thin layer of mud coating the floor. Not just one or two, but many sets, going in both directions. Some were partially filled with water, others still sharp-edged and fresh. Work boots from the treads. Someone had been down here recently, and frequently. The mother dog padded forward, her nails clicking against the concrete in a steady rhythm. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, taking turns at intersections without hesitation. Mira followed, trying to create a mental map of their route, but the tunnels all looked the same, endless curves of stained concrete disappearing into darkness. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, they reached a section where the tunnel widened slightly. Here, the chemical smell was stronger, almost antiseptic. Mira's light revealed something unexpected, a modern electrical conduit running along one wall, its plastic casing a stark contrast to the aged concrete. Following it with her light, she saw it disappeared into a small junction box that hummed faintly. Someone had installed it recently, and they'd done it professionally. The puppy's cries grew louder, accompanied now by a new sound, the soft whir of ventilation equipment. Myra's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an abandoned tunnel system. Someone was using it, maintaining it, powering it. Her light caught something else, a small object half buried in the mud. Crouching down, Myra carefully picked it up. It was a syringe cap, the kind used in medical procedures. The brand name printed on its side was one she recognized from her clinic's suppliers. But what was it doing down here? The mother dog's warning bark snapped Myra's attention forward. In the distance, a different kind of light flickered, steady and artificial. As they drew closer, Myra could make out what looked like a doorway, light spilling from underneath it. The puppies were definitely behind that door. Their whimpers were clear now, no longer distorted by the tunnel's acoustics. But something made her hesitate. The door itself was new, heavy steel with a modern security keypad mounted beside it. This wasn't some amateur operation. Whoever was using these tunnels had invested significant time and money into securing them. Myra's hand trembled slightly as she raised her phone, taking photos of everything she could see. If something happened to her down here, someone needed to know what she'd found. The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the damp air. The mother dog scratched at the door's base, looking back at Myra with pleading eyes. Her puppies were just on the other side, but so was something else, something that didn't belong in abandoned tunnels beneath a construction site. Something someone had gone to great lengths to hide. As if in response to her thoughts, a sound echoed through the tunnels behind them, the unmistakable metallic clang of the ladder they'd used to climb down. Someone else was entering the tunnel system. The mother dog's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. They were no longer alone in the darkness. With footsteps echoing behind them, Myra had seconds to make a decision. The keypad beside the door glowed mockingly, its red LED suggesting it needed a code she didn't have. But as she ran her flashlight along the frame, she noticed something. The door wasn't fully latched. Someone had been careless in their haste, leaving it slightly ajar. The sounds behind them grew closer. The mother dog's growl deepened, her hackles rising as she positioned herself between Myra and the approaching threat. Taking a deep breath, Myra pulled the heavy door open just enough to slip through, the mother dog following silently behind her. The chamber beyond made her freeze in horror. Her first impression was one of contradiction. The space was simultaneously crude and sophisticated, like a professional laboratory had been hastily transplanted into a cave. The walls were rough concrete, but they'd been partially covered with plastic sheeting to create a sterile environment. Old wooden crates were stacked against one wall, while modern medical equipment hummed on stainless steel tables. A gas lantern hung from a hook, its flame casting dancing shadows across the makeshift lab. The light illuminated rows of cages along one wall, most empty, but one containing 3 small shapes huddled together. The puppies. They were barely visible through the wooden slats, their brown fur matted and dull. The mother dog rushed to the cage, whining softly as she nosed at her puppies through the bars. They responded with weak whimpers, trying to reach her with tiny paws. Myra's veterinary instincts took over as she noticed the 4 lines running into the cage, connected to bags of clear fluid suspended above. This wasn't a simple case of animal abuse. This was something far more sinister. Moving closer, she examined the setup with growing dread. The 4 bags weren't labeled with standard medical information, but with codes and dates. A notebook lay open nearby, its pages filled with precise handwriting. Subject Group C, Trial 4. Compound XR27 administered at 0.5 mg per kilogram. Subjects show increased aggression after 48 hours. Heart rate elevated, pupils dilated. 2 casualties in previous trial group. Increasing dosage by 25% for next round. Myra's stomach churned as she flipped through more pages. The notes detailed systematic testing of experimental drugs on stray animals, recording their reactions with cold scientific precision. Charts tracked success rates and mortality figures. One page listed local shelters with notes about their security systems and staff schedules. But it was the photos clipped to the back that made her blood run cold. They showed dogs in fighting rings, their expressions unnaturally aggressive, pupils blown wide with chemical rage. These weren't just random experiments. Someone was developing drugs to turn strays into fighting dogs. A rattling sound made her jump. One of the wooden crates had shifted slightly, its lid partially open. Mira approached cautiously, using her phone's light to peer inside. The crate was filled with medical supplies, tranquilizers, syringes, surgical tools still in their sterile packaging. But these weren't standard veterinary supplies. Many had labels in foreign languages, others bore warning symbols she'd never seen before. Moving between the crates, she found more evidence of the operation's scope. There were shipping manifests describing laboratory specimens being transported across state lines, financial records showing payments to various disposal services, and most disturbing of all, a list of veterinary clinics in the area with staff names and schedules. Her own clinic was circled in red. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't some small-time criminal operation. This was organized, professional, and connected. Someone with serious medical knowledge and resources was running an underground drug testing facility, using stolen and stray animals as subjects, and they had enough influence to monitor local veterinary clinics. A soft scraping sound drew her attention to another corner of the chamber. Here, partially hidden behind more crates, she found something that didn't fit the laboratory setup: an old desk, its surface covered in papers and maps. The maps showed the city's underground tunnel system, with certain routes marked in red. Notes in the margins referenced delivery schedules and security patrol routes. But it was what she found in the desk drawer that made her heart stop: photos of people, clearly taken without their knowledge. Some showed people entering or leaving veterinary clinics. Others captured moments in parking lots or on city streets. With trembling fingers, Mira pulled out one that had been paperclipped to a personnel file. It was her, leaving her clinic just 2 days ago. They'd been watching her. Had they seen her specialty in treating fighting dogs? Did they think she might be useful to them? Or was she considered a threat? The mother dog's sudden warning growl snapped Mira back to their immediate danger. The footsteps in the tunnel had stopped, but now voices carried through the partially open door. "Lights on in the lab. Someone's definitely down here. Check the security footage from the surface entrance." "Already did. You're not going to believe this. It's that vet from Hope Valley Clinic. Dr. Chin? Well. Looks like we might have a use for her after all. What about the test subjects? Secure them first. We've invested too much to lose this batch. Then we'll deal with our unexpected guest." Myra's mind raced. There was no other exit from the chamber. The only door was the one they'd come through, now guarded by whoever was in the tunnel. The puppies were too weak to run, and even if they could, she had no idea how to navigate the maze of tunnels back to the surface. Looking around desperately, she noticed something about the plastic sheeting covering the walls. In one corner, it bellied out slightly, moved by an air current that shouldn't exist in a sealed underground chamber. There had to be another tunnel behind there, perhaps an old ventilation shaft or maintenance access. But before she could investigate, a sound froze her in place: the metallic click of the door's handle turning. The mother dog positioned herself between Mira and the entrance, her protective growl rumbling in the confined space. Time had run out. Someone was coming in, and Mira was about to discover exactly what happened to people who stumbled upon secrets buried beneath the city. The door swung open with a metallic groan that seemed to echo through Myra's bones. She pressed herself against the crates, the mother dog still standing protectively in front of her, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Through the gaps between the boxes, Mira watched as a single figure stepped into the chamber. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in the darkness. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing heavy work boots and a thick canvas jacket despite the underground warmth. His face remained in shadow as he paused just inside the doorway, but Mira could feel his gaze sweeping the room. "You can come out now, Dr. Chin," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost amused. "Let's not make this more uncomfortable than it needs to be." The mother dog's growl deepened, but the man showed no sign of concern. Instead, he reached up and adjusted the gas lantern's flame, brightening the chamber. The increased light revealed his face, weather-worn and lined, with gray stubble and eyes that seemed to hold both intelligence and danger. "How do you know my name?" Mira asked, staying hidden but knowing it was pointless to pretend she wasn't there. "We know a lot about you, Doctor. Mira Chin, graduated top of your class from Cornell. Specialized in treating trauma cases, particularly dogs rescued from fighting rings. Been working at Hope Valley Clinic for 3 years now?" He took another step into the room. "You've built quite a reputation. The dogs trust you. Their owners trust you. That's valuable to certain people." Myra's mind raced. The surveillance photos in the desk suddenly made more sense. "You've been watching me. Why? Originally? We were just monitoring potential threats, vets who might notice patterns in injured fighting dogs. But then we saw how you work. How you handle difficult cases. How you keep quiet when owners give suspicious explanations for injuries." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We've been thinking about making you a job offer." The implication made Myra's stomach turn. "I help animals. I don't torture them." "Torture?" He sounded genuinely offended. "This is research, Doctor. Scientific progress. Every medical advancement in history has required sacrifice. The compounds we're developing here could revolutionize behavior modification, not just in animals but eventually in humans. Think of the applications: controlling aggression in violent offenders, enhancing courage in soldiers, increasing compliance in law enforcement situations." As he spoke, he moved further into the room, his path cutting off any chance of reaching the door. But Mira noticed something. He was deliberately keeping his distance from the mother dog, respecting her defensive posture. He feared her, or at least what she might do. "Those puppies are dying," Mira said, trying to keep him talking while she inched toward the plastic sheeting where she'd felt the air current. "Your research is finishing them. Some subjects don't survive, yes. That's the nature of progress." He shrugged. "But think of what we're learning. And think of what you could contribute. Your expertise could help reduce casualties, refine our methods. You could be part of something revolutionary. By experimenting on stolen pets? On strays?" Myra's hand found the edge of the plastic sheeting. Behind it, she could definitely feel a draft. The man's expression hardened. Those animals were going to die anyway, in shelters, on the streets, in fighting rings. At least this way their deaths mean something. And let's be honest, Doctor, you don't really have a choice anymore. You've seen too much." His hand moved toward his back, and Mira caught the glint of metal, a gun, holstered under his jacket. The mother dog saw it too, her growl turning into a snarl of warning. "I'm going to make this simple," he said, his gentle tone gone. "You can join us willingly, use your skills to help advance this research. Or—" He let the threat hang unfinished. But something had changed in the chamber's atmosphere. The man's eyes darted to the doorway behind him, where voices and footsteps were approaching. He seemed distracted, expecting reinforcements. What he didn't notice was the mother dog's subtle shift in posture, from defensive to preparing to attack. Mira saw her chance. In one fluid motion, she ripped down the plastic sheeting, revealing what she'd hoped to find: an old maintenance shaft, its grating long since rusted away. At the same instant, the mother dog launched herself at the man with explosive force. He stumbled backward, reaching for his gun, but the dog was faster. Her teeth clamped around his wrist with surgical precision, drawing a cry of pain and sending the weapon clattering to the floor. The impact knocked him off balance, his head striking the edge of a metal table with a sickening thud. Mira didn't wait to see if he was conscious. She scrambled to the puppy's cage, thankful for once that it wasn't electronically locked. The latch opened easily, and she scooped up all 3 puppies, their tiny bodies worryingly light in her arms. "Here, girl!" she called to the mother dog, who immediately released the man's arm and bounded to her side. Behind them, shouts echoed from the tunnel as others responded to the commotion. Mira ducked into the maintenance shaft, her heart pounding. The space was tight but navigable, clearly part of an older tunnel system that predated the lab. The mother dog squeezed in behind her just as flashlight beams cut through the chamber. "Find them!" The man's voice was thick with pain and rage. "They couldn't have gone far. Seal all the exits." But Mira was already moving deeper into the shaft. The mother dog pressed close behind her, navigating by touch more than sight. The puppies whimpered softly against her chest as the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. They weren't safe yet, far from it. But at least now they had a chance. If only she could find a way back to the surface before their hunters sealed every escape route. The maintenance shaft was a tight fit, forcing Mira to crouch walk while cradling the puppies. Her phone's flashlight revealed decades of cobwebs and rust, suggesting this part of the tunnel system hadn't seen use in years. The mother dog stayed close behind, her breathing steady despite the confined space. A distant shout echoed through the walls. "Check the old maintenance tunnels! They have to connect somewhere!" Myra's heart raced. She had no idea where this shaft led, but she could feel a slight breeze against her face. There had to be an opening to the surface somewhere ahead. The puppies were eerily quiet in her arms, and she worried about the drugs still in their systems. As a vet, she knew they needed proper medical care soon. The shaft ended abruptly at a junction, splitting into 3 directions. Mira paused, trying to orient herself. Left would take them deeper underground, judging by the slight decline. Right seemed to continue straight ahead. But the center path had a different quality to its darkness, a faint grayish tinge that suggested natural light somewhere in the distance. Before she could decide, a rumble shook the tunnel. Dust and small pieces of concrete rained down from above. The storm must be getting worse, its water weakening the already unstable structure. The mother dog whined softly, nudging Mira toward the center path. They had gone perhaps 50 feet when another, stronger tremor hit. This one was accompanied by an ominous cracking sound from somewhere above. Mira quickened her pace, her shoulders scraping against the narrow walls. The puppies stirred restlessly in her arms, sensing her fear. Behind them, voices echoed closer. "The structure's becoming unstable. We need to get them now." The center path opened into a larger tunnel, this one tall enough to stand in. Old electrical boxes lined the walls, their metal doors hanging open to reveal rusted components. Myra's flashlight caught something promising, modern safety signs pointing toward an emergency exit. Someone had maintained this escape route, probably required by building codes even for abandoned structures. Another tremor, stronger than the last. This time, a section of ceiling collapsed behind them, sending the mother dog scrambling forward with a yelp. The crash would tell their pursuers exactly where they were, but it also cut off any chance of going back. "There! Up ahead!" A flashlight beam cut through the darkness behind them, followed by the sound of running feet. Mira saw it then, an access ladder leading up to what looked like a heavy metal hatch. It had to be their way out. But as she reached the ladder's base, she faced a terrible realization: she couldn't climb while holding all 3 puppies. The mother dog seemed to understand the dilemma. She positioned herself at the base of the ladder, looking up at Mira with those intelligent eyes. The meaning was clear: she would hold off their pursuers while Mira got the puppies to safety. "No," Mira whispered. "I won't leave you." A gunshot cracked through the tunnel, the bullet sparking off metal nearby. The mother dog barked urgently, pushing Mira toward the ladder with her nose. Another tremor shook the tunnel, this one accompanied by the screech of overstressed metal and concrete. The whole section was going to collapse. Mira made her decision. She tucked 2 puppies into her medical bag, leaving one cradled in her left arm. Then she started climbing, moving as fast as she dared. The hatch above had an emergency release lever, standard for fire exits. Mira pushed against it with her shoulder, grunting with effort. For a terrifying moment, it refused to move. Then, with a rush of rain-scented air, it swung open. She emerged into the storm, the construction site eerily lit by lightning flashes. The hatch opened near the foundation wall where their journey had begun. Mira quickly lifted the puppies out, then turned back to the opening. "Come on, girl!" she called down. "Hurry!" The mother dog had backed away from the ladder, facing their pursuers. Through the opening, Mira could see flashlight beams approaching. But something else was happening. The tremors had become continuous, and large cracks were spreading across the tunnel ceiling. "The whole thing's coming down!" someone shouted from below. "Get out now!" The mother dog finally turned and leaped for the ladder, climbing with desperate speed. Behind her, the man in the canvas jacket appeared, his face bloody from his earlier fall. He raised his gun. "No!" Mira screamed. Several things happened at once. The man fired, his shot going wide as another tremor shook the tunnel. The mother dog reached the top of the ladder, Mira grabbing her collar to pull her up. And with a deafening roar, the tunnel section collapsed. The man disappeared in a cloud of dust and falling debris. Mira and the mother dog scrambled away from the hatch as the ground around it caved in, creating a sinkhole that swallowed a section of the foundation wall. Then, through the settling dust and rain, came a single muffled sound from deep underground, a gunshot. Whether it was a last attempt at revenge or something more final, Mira would never know. She gathered the puppies close, checking them for injuries. The mother dog pressed against her side, shaking not from fear but from the cold rain now soaking her fur. Behind them, the construction site had become a scene of chaos. Parts of the unfinished building had collapsed into the sinkhole, and in the distance, emergency sirens were already approaching. Mira knew she should wait for the authorities, tell them everything. But as she looked at the evidence of the underground lab disappearing into the growing sinkhole, she realized something. The man had said there were certain people interested in her skills. People with enough influence to monitor local clinics and run research operations. People who might not want their secrets exposed. The mother dog nudged her hand, then looked toward the street. She seemed to be saying what Mira was thinking. Sometimes survival meant knowing when to walk away. Cradling the puppies in her medical bag and with the mother dog by her side, Mira melted into the rainy darkness. She had evidence on her phone, and she'd find a way to expose what she'd discovered. But right now, she needed to get these puppies somewhere safe and figure out who she could actually trust. Behind her, red and blue lights began to illuminate the scene as emergency vehicles arrived. The storm's fury was finally weakening, but its work was done. Whatever secrets remained in those tunnels were now buried under tons of concrete and steel, along with anyone who hadn't made it out in time. 2 days later, Mira sat in her clinic's back office, watching news coverage of the construction site disaster. The official story was that the storm had weakened an already unstable foundation, causing a catastrophic collapse into previously unknown utility tunnels. 3 bodies had been recovered, but their identities were being withheld pending investigation. She turned off the monitor and looked down at her desk, where photographs and documents were spread out before her. Everything she'd managed to capture on her phone that night, pictures of the lab, snippets of research notes, the surveillance photos. The images were grainy due to the poor lighting, but they were clear enough to prove she hadn't imagined any of it. A soft whine drew her attention to the corner of her office. The mother dog lay there on a plush bed, watching her with those knowing eyes while her puppies nursed. All 3 had recovered remarkably well once the experimental drugs cleared their systems. Mira had treated them herself, working through that first night to stabilize their condition and destroy any trace of the compounds in their blood. She named the mother dog Luna, for the way she'd appeared out of that dark, stormy night. The puppies, 2 females and a male, she called Star, Storm, and Shadow. Their official paperwork listed them as strays brought in during the storm, nothing more. Sometimes the safest truths were the simple ones. A knock at her door made her quickly gather the photos into a folder. "Come in." Nancy, her receptionist, poked her head in. "Dr. Chin? There are 2 men here asking to speak with you. They say they're from the city planning office, investigating the construction site collapse." Myra's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "Tell them I'm with a patient right now. Get their cards, I'll call them back." After Nancy left, Mira walked to her window. In the parking lot, she could see 2 men in suits returning to a black SUV with government plates. But something about their posture, the way they moved, these weren't city planners. They moved like the man in the tunnel, with that same confident authority. She waited until they drove away before pulling out her burner phone, purchased with cash the day after the incident. She dialed one of only 2 numbers saved in it. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered on the second ring. "Sarah? It's Mira." They're starting to ask questions. Sarah Martinez, Myra's sister and an investigative journalist for a major online news outlet, had been her first call after that night. "Did they see anything?" "No. But they'll be back." Mira watched Luna, who had raised her head alertly at the phone call. "How's the story coming?" "Slowly. Carefully. That company you mentioned, Pharmatech? They've got connections everywhere. Military contracts, government research grants, private security firms. We need to be absolutely certain before we publish anything. And the other thing? My contact at the FBI is interested, but she needs more. Photos and a witness statement aren't enough. These people are too good at making evidence disappear. We need paper trails, financial records, something that proves where the funding came from." Mira touched the folder on her desk. "I'm working on it. But Sarah, be careful. These people, they watch everything. They've been monitoring vets, clinics, maybe even animal shelters. Their network is bigger than we thought. You be careful too, sis. Maybe you should take that job offer in Seattle, just until this blows over." "I can't run." Mira walked back to Luna and her puppies, kneeling beside them. "These dogs trusted me. Others will need help too. Running away won't stop what's happening." After ending the call, Mira returned to her desk and opened a different folder, this one containing adoption applications. Dozens of families wanted to give homes to Luna and her puppies, but Mira had already made her decision. Luna would stay with her, she'd earned that right. The puppies would go to carefully chosen homes, far from Hope Valley, their origins known only to people Mira trusted completely. Her computer chimed with an email notification. Another request from the police for a statement about that night. She'd already given them the basic story: following a stray dog, finding evidence of animal abuse, escaping before the collapse. Nothing about the lab, the experiments, or the wider conspiracy. Let them think it was just another dog-fighting operation. Luna patted over and rested her head on Myra's lap. Together, they looked at the last photo on Myra's desk, the security badge she'd found in the tunnel. Dr. Marcus Webb's face stared back at them, his eyes holding secrets that were now buried under tons of rubble. But even as she watched the photo, questions nagged at her. Had Webb survived the collapse? The bodies they'd found hadn't been identified publicly. If he had survived, was he back at work, starting the operation somewhere else? And if he hadn't, who would take his place? The man in the tunnel had said they'd been watching her, evaluating her. Were they still watching? Waiting to see what she'd do with what she knew? How many other vets were under surveillance, being assessed for their potential usefulness to the program? And the biggest question, how deep did it all go? The sophisticated lab equipment, the experimental drugs, the extensive surveillance network, it all required massive funding and organization. Who was really behind it all, and what were they ultimately trying to achieve? Luna's wet nose pressed against her hand, bringing Mira back to the present. The dog's eyes held a wisdom that seemed to say some questions might never be answered, and that was okay. What mattered was what they did with the answers they had. Mira scratched behind Luna's ears, then reached for her phone again. She had more calls to make, trusted colleagues who needed to be warned, shelter managers who should know what to watch for, journalists who might help uncover more of the truth. The underground lab was gone, but its legacy lived on in the questions it raised and the choices those questions demanded. As she worked, Luna settled at her feet, ever watchful. Outside, the city of Hope Valley went about its business, its citizens unaware of the secrets that had been buried beneath their streets. But somewhere in the darkness, Mira knew, others like Webb were continuing their work, watching and waiting. Some mysteries would remain unsolved, some questions unanswered. But as long as there were people willing to look deeper, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, there was hope. And sometimes, Mira had learned, hope began with a single act of trust, like a mother dog, desperate to save her puppies, choosing the right person to ask for help on a dark and stormy night.